Hi there. So good to be with you here today. My warmest greetings from Brazil. The subject of my presentation is the perceptions on Brazilian metal identity. I'm Ivison. I hold a bachelor degree in economics, hold a master's degree and a PhD in social history. I'm also an independent researcher and I write at the webzine Metal Addicts, where I write reviews about metal albums. Okay, then. My main hypothesis to be tested is if Brazilian extreme metal bands as Sarcófago, Sepultura, Crisium, Volcano, and so many others have historically developed a die-hard international fan base. Thus, Brazilian metal identity would be hugely connected to them. Therefore, a Brazilian metal perception on identity would rely on mostly extreme metal bands. On the other hand, there is another facet of the international success, which is from bands as Viper, Angra, Alma, Silent Cry, and the growing reputation of Brazilian metal musicians as Kiko Loureiro, Andre Matos, Achilles Priester, among others, from a power melodic metal tradition strongly related to Angra. The question is if this identity would be as strong as extreme metals. The impression that remains is that both facets were historically built as well through time as a result of the band's look to an international career as a wish, a necessity, or even both. Following these ideas, Silva posited that in 1989, two albums were accurate representations of Brazilian heavy metal, even though, in his opinion, they were opposed to each other. Viper's Theater of Fate and Sepultura's Beneath the Remains. The first would be considered one of the pioneers of a more melodic verve of heavy metal to use classical music features, and the second, a legend among extreme metal bands. Though Silva pointed them as musically opposed, he posted that they had in common the fact of writing their lyrics in English. In terms of methodology, the research may be included to the concept of contemporary history as Eric Hobsbawm defines it as being the history of events usually within the lifetime of the historian. Why perceptions on identity and not identity? First of all, it is necessary to discuss why perceptions on identity and not identity. For that reason, changing the title Brazilian Metal Identity to Perceptions on Brazilian Metal Identity was intentional. It could lead to a discussion where the term identity would have to be considered deeply from a sociological view. There is no intention whatsoever in making this approach due to the existing complex and long bibliography into the social sciences. Identity is a harsh term to work without the proper methodological tools. On the other hand, as a historian, the term perception fits best as Peter Burke summed up when he tells about the way historians deal with perceptions. The point here is to describe how fans, while listening to a band, react to their music, and immediately it reminds them of a Brazilian heavy metal identity, if there is such thing. The perceptions on Brazilian metal identity. Lots of great metal music was made in Brazil, and that is the fact. Greg, Wingless, and consequently show the world that Brazil is a metal force to be reckoned with. Brian Strait, Witch Hunt. Brazil is an important base to the all heavy metal sound. Steel Hammer. Well, the research. In order to reach a wider and more varied universe of answers, two questionnaires were prepared and sent via social media. The first reached band members, the second, fans of all nationalities, including Brazilians. To both groups, the questionnaire aimed answers regarding to the perceptions about Brazilian heavy metal bands. Moreover, to bands, there was also the intent to seek for influences if they could have had any. The band's responses were so warm and so positive that it led me to have the wish to write this work uh, in a qualitative way than a quantitative. Miss Vils Stravos said, well, I have been watching the metal scene around worldwide for about 10 years. How? Since I was 14 years old, and one way or another, Brazil always shows up somewhere, somehow. Most of the times, this happens with Brazilian metal fans that are everywhere in every metal video on YouTube. It is no secret that the best concerts happen in Brazil. The response to the grows in Brazil is to the shows in Brazil is legendary, and I believe that this shows the amount of metal fans Brazil has. Also, Brazil has a lot of great virtuoso musicians that are playing with top names, and in my mind, it should lead it as a country metal right now. I think more bands need to come out of Brazil and become more known. There are hidden gems, especially in black metal and death metal, and they are just that, hidden. Witch Hunt's Brian Strait remembered the movements of the crowd at Iron Maiden shows and Bruce Dixon's impressions on them. As Bruce Dixon has said many times over the years, Brazilians are the most musical population on the planet. Doesn't matter if the music is sertaneja, bossa nova, or funk. Brazilians take music in incredibly seriously. To them, it's not just entertainment, but a lifestyle and a celebration rolled into one. The same is true for Brazilian metal bands. They are sincere, passionate, and devoted to their craft like few others in the world. This is what has made Brazilian metal a respected and revered commodity on the world music scene. There was only one response that the person said he did not know any Brazilian band. Very few responded that they did know many bands. Actually, the general response was the names of many bands and their albums of all metal subgenres. As expected, Sepultura were the band whose name popped up in all answers, and for this separate item will be created to analyze the perceptions gathered about the band. Many answers reflected not only the bands, but the image of the country itself and the importance and relevance of its bands in metal music world. To a Brazilian, there is always the feeling that our position in metal world is the same of that poor cousin who's invited to a fancy party by his rich cousins. Uncomfortable. The answers showed, in fact, the opposite. Brazilian bands played and still play a very important role in metal worldwide scene. The matter is not only the fact of having many bands to show, it is also the relevance. It's not only Sepultura, but also Angra and Viper, such pioneer bands that gave their contribution to enrich the music and helped shaping it. By the answers, it is possible to say that regarding to metal music, Brazil goes beyond its political and economical relevance in the world. As Moribundus Martus Vir put it, Brazil, Brazilian metal is a reference on the international underground scene in terms of brutality and power and hate, which makes it so true. It doesn't need to show off to be effective, which I think is its most important feature, by the way. The list of bands and fans is as international as it can be. It is also varied regarding to metal subgenres, as the answers showed a diversity that is not expected by scholars in these days of metal split in many subgenres. Moribundo's Evil Dead answer supports this statement. Well, despite playing a doom death band, I enjoy several kinds of music, and Brazilian metal scene has a big bunch of brilliant bands that I used to listen. I like Brazilian old school extreme bands such as Sepultura, Sarcófago, Ratos de Porão, or Crisium, and I also find quite interesting some actual acts like Nervosa, Infected Sphere, or Sepulchral Horror. I also enjoy some gothic dark stuff like Avec Tristesse or Semblant. I must confess that I don't know too much about Brazilian melodic metal, but Angra's Angels Cry is one of my favorite albums ever. Andre was one of the most talented heavy metal singers around the world, and his incredible voice won't be forgotten. But why were all those people initially attracted to Brazilian metal bands? Was there any particular element in their music that sparked their attention? There are two answers to these questions. The first is directly linked to the early bands from the 1980s, which were pioneers of the early extreme metal scene. To some fans, Brazilian perception on identity has a strong presence in the early stages of extreme metal, Sepultura, Sarcófago, that kind of stuff, as a fan responded. To others, the relation is with more energetic songs. The reason that Brazilian metal is a reference on the international underground scene in terms of brutality and power, which make it so true, is an evidence of their power and hate. Pioneer albums from Cogumelo Records, which unconsciously opted to mainly feature bands with lyrics in English, took an important role in the process of giving bands an early recognition out of Brazil. Ivo Lins Ansi pointed out, saying that his perception of Brazilian metal is heavily dominated by the thrash metal that Cogumelo releases. Also quoting bands are Sepultura, Volcano, and Sarcophago. Dark Throne's Fenris always quotes Sarcophago's albums as reference to his band. The second goes by the Brazilian music elements combined with metal. An explosive mix commenced by Sepultura in 1993's Chaos AD to reach its peak in 1996, Roots, followed then by Angra's 1996 Holy Land, and later Shaman. The irony is that for many years, Brazilian metal bands avoided this tradition. Moribundus Mortus Vir noticed this irony by saying, "It has always amazed me the fact that Brazilian metal is so raw and dirty, being joy, party, and fun, the most exported themes from the rest of its music." However, the mix initially done by Sepultura used ancient Kiowa's influences and rhythms with no reference to Brazilian popular music. 1996 Roots deepened this partnership, including more musical elements and instruments of the tribe, creating the praised mix. Angra's Holy Land went by the same path, including reference to Hermeto Pascoal, a composer and multi-instrumentalist musician who, de rigueur, do not belong to Brazilian popular music either. Due to this, due to this unique and unusual combination, Lancers Friedrich Kellman have always thought that Brazilian metal have a really unique way of using rhythms in the guitar riffing. You can always almost tell straight away when a Brazilian musician is behind the music. Also, the way they compose melodies are quite rare, but rhythms are the main thing. According to him, Brazilian metal musicians incorporate into their music consciously or unconsciously elements of national culture, more precisely the rhythms. Angel Swords, Lady Mike, shares the same opinion as he said, Brazilian metal identity is in the strong traditional music influences like the rhythms. Bit similar like in Finland, it is with melancholy. Starving Souls, Simon Kennerville, added that it does not happen to all the bands, of course, but the top ones are surely recognizable. They bring national melodies and cultural peculiarities into their music, thus contributing to the pool of global metal sound. With this idea in mind, two the bands were asked the question if they were influenced in any way by Brazilian bands. Angra and Sepultura were the bands most quoted and the reasons varied. On the other hand, Traitors Gate declared to have been influenced by both. It's been interesting talking to the band and getting a perception of Brazilian metal. The main point would be that Max Cavalera is how we as a band really perceived Brazilian metal. Growing up in an era that didn't have the internet, it was only ever the biggest bands that made an impact. Influence is always difficult to perceive, but we are close to completing our second album and listening back to the first mixes, it is clear how much we have been influenced by Sepultura. Both Poe and I agreed that Angra more recently have had a big impact on us. Beyond that, our influences have mostly come from the USA in the 80s, moving into Germany as we progressed through the many decades with influences appearing from all over the world as communication improved. To Steel Hammer, the influence goes beyond, and they consider that all the South American bands are influenced one by one. Brazilian sound is an important base for old school sounds. Brazil is an important base for all heavy metal sound. The Sepultura factor. Sepultura's successful career has undoubtedly made it possible to consider any chapter of the history of or any consideration about Brazilian metal without coding them. The reasons are not only because they opened the doors of international market to Brazilian bands, but also due to the relevance and reach of their music. Avelar considered Sepultura to be based on their uniqueness has resided less in the maintenance of a presumably pure and original authenticity. The band changes its music consistently rather in the ability to think and act ahead. All the effort Max Cavalera had when he flew to New York with some copies of 1987's Schizophrenia to be promoted paid off. After signing a deal with Dutch Roadrunner Records, the doors to international recognition and success were open. According to Keith Harris, from 1989 onward, Sepultura rapidly became one of the most successful bands within death metal worldwide. They contributed to the solidifying of death metal as a genre with a set of coherent rules and attendant sonic institutions. The year 1991, when Sepultura released their third album, Arise, which was recorded in Tampa with Scott Burns, was in many ways the high watermark of death metal with thousands of bands throughout the world, making it predominantly participatory metal genre. By that stage, Sepultura had become leading exponents of death metal and were playing major metal festivals as Rock in Rio and Donington. Sepultura managed to create a distinctive sound that can be considered as Brazilian metal identity, especially for the thrash metal world, said Mirenegan's Dimitris Kostianopoulos. In the process of telling their experiences, a feeling of gratitude towards the band popped up as Witch Hunt's Brian Strait shared. Like most Americans of my generation, the first Brazilian metal band I heard was Sepultura when a friend loaned me Beneath the Remains in 1990. I was 13 years old, and honestly, the album slaughtered all of us. I only got to see Sepultura live one time in 1994 when they toured with Pantera and Biohazard in the United States. But it was an experience I'll never forget, seeing them play the songs from Chaos AD in front of 10,000 screaming and singing fans. Keith Ken Harris' point of view about the band goes beyond their success and recognition as one of the most important bands of the scene. For him, Sepultura's success was a key factor in inspiring that death metal scenes throughout the world, opining, opening up possibilities for bands from marginalized scenes everywhere. It is fair to say that few bands deserved such attention. Even though the band has reached an unparalleled recognition around the world and metal bands praise their name, Sepultura have never headlined major festivals in Brazil. They took part in many of them, but never as headliners, which consists in a paradox. Well, my conclusion: the code and the code and objective display of the results of this research through graphics or tables would take away all the warmth and the closeness of the responses, as the data collected from the answers gave further information that was expected. Moreover, the kind of information collected by this research could not be displayed as objectively by statistics tools without the risk of losing all their meaningfulness. So, instead of displaying them as an orthodox manner, I decided to go the other way around by little inserting them into the text to carefully get their essence. It is a fact that some details may rise only after a thorough and careful analysis of the answers given. It also is known that the devil is in the details. Interviewees' responses showed a level of knowledge of Brazil that was beyond the common belief, not making easily misunderstood facts of the country. As a result, the evidence collected showed that Brazilian bands sparked interest not only for their music, but also an interest for the country. Although the interviewee's answers confirmed the perception of Brazilian metal to be utterly connected with early extreme metal, there was an unforeseen specific element revealed. That would be the Brazilianness. Keith Can Harris spoke as of the existence of ethnic features as diverse as rhythms applied to riffing, percussion instruments that brought power to drumming, socially engaged lyrics, among others. This Brazilianness would be brought to the scene after the crystallization of early extreme metal bands and is still present, though scarcely. Sepultura would be the responsible for Sepultura would be the responsible for it, followed by Angra. It was also strong, the band's perception of this process to be an outcome of the process of globalization metal went through the 90s, though many interviews did not connect them with an exotic product of it. To many of them, Brazilian bands were considered an important and influent part of metal music. That may be a consequence of the so-called metal brotherhood and camaraderie. It was also strong the perception of Viper's related bands and their influence shaping melodic power metal and symphonic metal. Even though the band was not quoted by any interviewee, it is important to consider Angra, the second most quoted band, were a kind of Viper's bastard son for being united after Andre Matos' departure and followed the neoclassical musical ideas he introduced in 1989's Theater of Fate. Well, this is it. Thank you very much